I am so excited to talk about ritual and ceremony today. So, here at the Coaching Revolution podcast and inside of my entire business at Applied Depth Institute, we get off the beaten path of traditional coaching. We certainly learn and master a lot of aspects of traditional coaching, but really what we're doing here is bigger, different, and sometimes outside of the box in so many different ways. And for today's episode, it's included in that because ceremony and ritual are not traditionally talked about inside of coach trainings. They're not necessarily really done so much inside of coaching sessions, but I will tell you, ritual and ceremony are 100% embedded into Applied Depth Institute, into Sacred Depths coaching, and honestly, into really everything that I do. And in some ways, ritual and ceremony is at the heart of why I'm able to go so deep and be so transformational in my one-on-one work and in my group work, whether I'm actually leading ritual or whether principles of a ritual are informing the work that we do. And it is truly, ritual and ceremony are truly one of my favorite things to teach about, to train on, and also to do, not just with clients, but also with myself. Ritual and ceremony in so many different ways are woven through my life. I also do them with my kids. My teenager these days, not so much. She's kind of too cool for school, but with my younger one, Yael, she's still really into it. And I really believe that ritual is one of the most powerful coaching, healing, and facilitation tools that you can have for your clients and for yourself. And I say this and I kind of stand by this because of the powerful impact that I've observed that ritual has had in for my clients, in my groups, and on myself, both in terms of short-term shifts and breakthroughs, as well as long-term transformation and results. I also say that ritual is one of the most powerful coaching, healing, and facilitation tools you can have, not just from what I've observed, not just anecdotally, but also because there's a ton of scientific and neuroscience research that provides evidence of how powerful ceremonies can be. And I'll just name a few things right now. So, studies have shown that ceremony, that ritual have impact on emotional regulation. Rituals can activate the parasympathetic nervous system, and then that leads to a state of calm. It reduces stress hormones. Ceremonies and ritual can offer a structured way for people to process emotions and even difficult ones like grief. That's why there are so many funeral rites across so many different cultures. Research has shown that ceremony and ritual can positively impact focus and attention, that the structured nature of ceremonies can improve focus and concentration by calming the mind. Research has shown that they have positive impact on social connection, that engaging in communal or group rituals can increase levels of social bonding, and the bonding hormone oxytocin. And then that fosters even more of a sense of community and belonging. Research has shown that ceremony and ritual activates dopamine release. And dopamine, if you know is associated with the feelings of pleasure and satisfaction and motivation. And then ceremonies also signal to the brain that a significant or a transformational event is occurring. And then that affects the brain's interpretation of the situation. So, anecdotally, I've witnessed, I've experienced the power of ritual and ceremony, and also research shows the power of ritual and ceremony. And one of the things that I advocate for is to bring more of this or pieces of this more into our coaching work, our one-on-one and our group work. Now, we could spend many, many months on this topic, but we're going to just toe dip today. And I do spend a full 4 days on ritual and ceremony and group facilitation in my training called Into the Depths. It's 4 days that are in person here in Charlotte because it really is best to learn about ritual, ceremony, and crafting experiential exercises. It's best to learn it in person because of how experiential and dynamic it is. I only offer Into the Depths once every 3 years or so. The next one is happening in just a few months in December 2025 at the beginning of the month. And we have just a few spots left. So if this is something that interests you, I'll drop a link in the show notes. Okay, so let's start here. And I want to just share briefly how I came to be a ritualist. I do consider myself to be a ritualist. And it's been a journey for sure. Without realizing it, it actually started from when I was a little girl and my family observed many Jewish traditions, and a lot of the traditions in Judaism are really rich with ceremony and ritual, and I just loved them. I just have that has been one of my favorite parts of the culture since I was a little girl. I just really connected to ritual. But from there, when I was in my mid-20s, I was living in New York City on the Upper East Side. That's really when I more deeply stepped into all of this and stepped into all of this in a little bit more of a formal way. And it started with one day I was in my studio apartment. And I was leafing through a brochure from an organization that was in the West Village called the Open Center. The Open Center had been in Manhattan for a really long time. Lots of different meditation classes, philosophy classes, visualization classes, journaling classes, that sort of thing. And I was flipping through the brochure and I came upon a blurb for a course that was going to be offered there. And the name of the course was called Woman Ritual. And I don't know, it got my attention. And I said, well, let me read the blurb. And I honestly don't remember the words. I don't remember exactly what the blurb said. But what I do remember was that when I read this description of this ritual course, and it spoke about how women in particular had been the keepers of ritual for millennia across so many different cultures. There was just something about this description that reminded me of something I knew when I was a little girl, but I had kind of forgotten. I had kind of temporarily lost. And it was that the world is a magical place. There's more than just the surface. There's more than meets the eye, and that we as human beings are connected to that magic. And that was enough for me to decide to take this course at the Open Center, which, by the way, I was in my mid 20s then, and I was working at a museum and I was making very little money. I don't even think I was making $30,000 at the time. It was 99, maybe 1999. Anyway, I bring this up because I think the woman ritual course was, I don't know, maybe it was like $200 for 6 weeks or something like that. That was a big investment for me at the time. I was, paying rent on a studio on the Upper East Side. Money was tight, but there was something about this that just called to me so deeply that I was willing to make that investment. I took this 6 week course. It was taught by a woman named Susan Mary Hellerer, who I really consider as one of my first mentors. And those 6 weeks opened up so much for me. I learned so much and I felt so connected to ritual, to women's circles, and a lot of ideas about the wheel of the year were woven through it. And I connected so deeply to it. I resonated so much with it that I went on to become an apprentice with Susan Mary, and I apprenticed in her community for a number of years, set up before all of the rituals and the women's circles, cleaned up after all of the circles. It was a lot. I learned a lot. It was incredible. And then from there, I went on to lead women's circles. And, I won't get too much into my story with this and my journey with this right now, but just to give you some idea and some examples, I went on to lead these women's circles that were related to the wheel of the year or the wheel of the month. So I would lead new moon ceremonies and full moon ceremonies, and then different ones related to the wheel of the year. So, for example, I would lead winter solstice ceremonies where we would use the metaphor of the longest night of the year and the shortest day of the year. And inside of that, the concept that it's important in life sometimes to be in the darkness, to be in the mystery, to be in the silence, the not knowing, etc., and then find that spark. The winter solstice is kind of like the spark. So I led lots of circles and rituals along those lines, lots of circles and rituals related to women's development and leadership, queen ceremonies, etc., etc. And then along the way, I also became a celebrant. So I became a legal wedding officiant because, at least at the time, I'm not sure if it's still true for New York City. It wasn't that anyone could officiate a wedding legally in New York City. You needed to kind of go through hoops to become a legal wedding officiant. So I became a celebrant. I did weddings, I did funeral rituals, baby blessing rituals, house blessing ceremonies, and lots of other rites of passage, circles, and ceremonies. And I did all of this even before I became a coach. And all of this, as I said earlier, it really informs so much of my coaching. And I bring ritual or elements of ritual or philosophies of ritual into my one-on-one coaching into my groups. It makes all of it so much more powerful. And one of the many reasons that ritual and ceremony are so powerful are because they allow you to tap into the cognitive level of learning and processing. So they activate the intellect. Ritual also allows you to tap into the emotional level of learning and processing. So it allows you to activate the heart, emotion. Ritual allows you to tap into the spirit level of learning and processing. It activates a connection to something bigger than the ego. And ritual also allows you to tap into the somatic or the body level of learning and processing. And the thing that's so incredible about ritual is that all at once, in a well-crafted ritual, you are tapping into all of those four levels of learning and processing: the cognitive, the emotional, the spiritual, and the somatic. Ritual really poises you and your clients for deeper embodiment and integration of breakthroughs and new awarenesses and outer action. As an aside, we want to be activating the four levels of learning and processing in all of our coaching work, whether we're doing ritual or we're not doing ritual. And if you want to learn more about the four levels and how they can apply to your client work, go to podcast episode number 3. I did a whole podcast episode on those four levels of learning and processing. I often say that ritual and ceremony were the original embodiment and somatic work, right? That was like this is ancient and it's the original embodiment and somatic work. And of course, there's that deep connection to the spiritual that happens during ritual and ceremony. And that's why so many religions use ritual and ceremony inside of their services, right? There's an energy also inside of really well-held ritual containers that activate a connection to the divine or to something larger than the ego. Now, when I say ritual, a couple of things. So first of all, inside of this episode, I'm using ritual, the terms or the terminology ritual and ceremony interchangeably. So I'm not really inside of this podcast episode making a difference between ritual and ceremony. That being said, when we go deep into it, there is a little bit of a difference between ritual and ceremony. They're absolutely related in many, many ways. And a ritual can be a ceremony, vice versa. Ritual is, though, if we just want to lightly kind of make a distinction right now, ritual is something ritualized. It happens in a particular way consistently. A ceremony can be a one-time thing. Also, what we're talking about here, and this is really important, when I say using ritual inside of your client work, your group work, I don't mean that you're using any pre-created rituals, any canned rituals. What we're talking about here is ritual that is created by you and or you and your client co-create them together and tailor them 110% to your clients or your group's needs. Along those lines, I also want to be clear that when I use ritual and teach coaches and practitioners to use ritual, we are not appropriating sacred ceremonies from cultures that aren't ours. So there's a lot of really good information about cultural appropriation of ritual online. And I'll drop some resources in the show notes on this. But, I make a point of this, even in this podcast episode where it's not a training. It's important to say because a lot of, I'm going to call them new age or spiritual, I don't, whatever it is, practitioners have really stolen from other cultures, and we don't want to do that when we create ritual. Now, of course, use elements from your own cultural or religious legacy, or if you're working with a client, from your clients, and create your own. It's so much about the co-creation, what we're talking about here today. There's so many ways that ritual can look inside of your client work. And inside of one-on-one work, if you're skilled and masterful at ritual, you might either do a ritual inside of a client session with a client, and most likely you'll have prepared the ritual beforehand together. Sometimes you might just create a ritual on the sly inside of a session. In one-on-one work, you might also co-create a ritual with a client and then they go off and do it on their own in between sessions. And I also, as I've said, I love to use rituals inside of my group work as well. What you'll see as we continue on with this episode is that no matter what your expertise is, no matter what types of clients you work with, no matter if you work on Zoom or in person or even on the phone, I have absolutely led ritual on the phone, one-on-one, or on Bridgeline. I was one of those. I was just telling this to some friends of mine who are coaches. We were out to dinner the other night. I was one of the last holdouts to move from those conference bridge lines when I taught classes or led rituals to Zoom. So I can attest, you can even do ritual on the phone. Anyway, it doesn't matter what your expertise is. It doesn't matter what types of clients you work with. It doesn't matter what your curriculum is. No matter what it is, you can use ritual and it'll make the work more effective, more engaging, more transformational. It really is for all different kinds of work. And I'll just give a few examples right now for you to think about. So if you are working with a client and they are moving through a divorce, let's say you're a relationship coach, you can create a ritual to be able to release what your client might be clinging on to from the marriage or old definitions of their relationship. You can create a ritual to support your client to move out of a pattern where they're holding back from new love. Or let's say you're a business coach and you have a client that's starting a new business, let's say. You can work with them to create a ritual to embody the vision of their new business, to be able to set strong foundations for the new business, to activate more inspiration and motivation. That ritual can also help you and your client Work more deeply through your clients' limiting beliefs, ones that are holding them back from starting a new business. Here are some other examples. You can create a ceremony to help a client release unhelpful habits. For example, codependence with a sibling or overworking. You can use ritual to support a client to really own and embody forward movement that they're making, that they've worked on. Maybe you've worked with your client and they're much more confident in themselves. You can create a ritual around that to embody that more deeply. Maybe you've worked with a client and they've finally raised their rates. You can create a ritual to honor and own that more deeply. And you can even use ritual inside of corporate culture. You can use ritual to help a team level up their agreements or level up the team environment. You can use ritual if, let's say, a client of yours is stepping into a new role in the organization, and ritual can help them feel more grounded inside of it, more confident inside of it. And if you're saying to yourself as you're listening to me, what's Joanna talking about? This is way too woo for corporate culture. It might be for some. I'm not saying, every single corporation or CEO that you work with or team leader that you work with is going to be into this. But what I will say is there actually has been research to back up that ritual is powerful even inside of the corporate culture. And it has been shown that simple business rituals can increase oxytocin levels, promote stronger team cohesion, do so much. Now, I just gave a sliver of examples of types of scenarios that you can use ritual in. I mean, honestly, the possibilities are endless. This is one of the things that I love about ritual. It is so, so versatile. Well, one thing I want you to know is that, and I know it goes without saying, but still, it's important. Ritual alone isn't going to help create these changes that I've been talking about, right? Embodying the vision of a new business, helping to let go of things that you're clinging from an old marriage, et cetera, et cetera. The ritual or the ceremony will most likely come after you've done other work that's related with your client. So you're not going to create and do the ritual or the ceremony at the start of the work. You're most likely going to do it towards the end of the work. It might be after a session, or more likely a number of sessions that maybe support the client to befriend fears on the topic that you're working on, or rewire unhelpful thought patterns on the topic you're working on, or do visioning work on the topic you're working on. After that, the ceremony, right? The ceremony is often most effective once inner and outer or movement have started to take place. So, for example, a ritual to release codependence with a parent will most likely, in your work with a client, come after the two of you have done deep work around your client's fear of isolation if they set boundaries. And then the ritual after you've done that deep work will help to really integrate all of the learning and forward movement that has happened already. Or the ritual to help your client claim that they're ready to be more visible in their business. The ritual will most likely come after the two of you have done deep work, probably over some time, around your client finally really believing that they're good enough. Or after you've done deep work over time around your client working through the fear of being seen. And then the ritual through symbol and metaphor and maybe archetypal energy will integrate all of the learning and forward movement that has already happened. And I'll also share, so even all the years, for example, that I officiated weddings, I loved to officiate weddings. I always used to tell couples when I started working together with them in advance of the wedding, I would say, we want to create a ceremony whereby you feel like something changes on the altar, where you walk away from the altar different than how you walked to it, where you walk away from it in deeper union. But anyway, um, I'm bringing this up because of this idea of pre-work, of the idea that the ceremony, the ritual comes, it works best after preparation has been done. So in the case of weddings, I would work with couples over time, over a number of months, sometimes shorter if they called me last minute for the first time, but we'd at least have a few sessions where we would work together on what does marriage mean to them? What are the values that they want to bring in to this union? What are they scared of? What are they leaving behind? What are their hopes and dreams? What kind of household do they want? What are some issues where, they can still work through things? We did all this pre-work as well as prepping together what the ceremony would look like so that by the time the ceremony came, they had already done so much work around their relationship and what this coming together and this new creation, this new birth, right? This really they were birthing this next iteration of their relationship. We'd already done so much work on that together that the ceremony meant even more. Even for birthday rituals. So if you've been listening to the podcast, I've shared about rituals that I do on my birthday every year. Before I get to the actual ceremony part, the actual ritual part, the metaphoric part, I'm doing pre-work, journaling work, visioning work to get there, right? So something to think about. So one thing that I want to point out also around all of this is that while I don't believe we have enough ritual that happens inside of culture, and I'll talk more about that in a few minutes, we do have many rituals that happen in culture. And I bring it up. Oh, okay. So let's pause here. Joey, this part that I just did needs to be cut out about rituals in popular culture? So let's take a step back for a moment. And I want to share a couple of my definitions of what ritual is and a couple of foundational philosophies around ritual that I think will be really helpful for you as you consider all of this for your own work. So, the first is ritual is taking an action in order to make the intangible tangible. Taking an action in order to make the intangible tangible. And when we do this, when we take this action and we make an intangible feeling, idea, intention, etc., tangible through the object, right, that we're taking the action on, it signals to the psyche that we mean business. It signals to the psyche that this is something important, that something important is happening here. So, inside of popular culture and religion, we have lots of different rituals, and I'm going to give some examples of how they make the intangible tangible. Lighting and then blowing out birthday candles, right? We make a wish, something intangible, a desire for ourselves, a wish or a desire for the year, and the blowing out of the flame is taking that wish and turning it into a tangible thing. Here's another example. Graduations are ceremonies, right? There's the giving of the diploma, but let's focus on the moving the tassel, right? One of the very last things that happens in a graduation ceremony, which marks the end of, a series of education and then moving on, right? Is you move the tassel on the graduation hat from one side to the other. That is making the intangible that we're moving from one way of being to another. We're moving from this education on to the next place, right? It's making the intangible tangible by moving the tassel. When we throw a penny in a fountain, that's a ritual, right? We make a wish on the penny, a tangible thing. We throw it into the fountain. Ribbon cuttings for new business. There's the cutting of the ribbon symbolizes the birth and the opening of a new business. Baptisms make the intangible tangible with water. One of the many rituals we have inside of Judaism is dipping an apple in honey for a sweet new year, right? So the desire is to have a really sweet new year, and it gets symbolized. We make the intangible tangible by dipping an apple in honey and eating it. And at my Rosh Hashanah table, the New Year's table, for years now, we've kind of added on to that ritual. Everybody has a turn, they go around the table, they say one sweet thing that they would like for the new year, and then they dip the apple in the honey and eat it and just savor the sweet taste. And then beyond all of that, I could give so many other examples of how ritual makes the intangible tangible. Sometimes some divorce rituals might include burning the marriage mattress, right? That's a big way of making the intangible tangible. I've led rituals where with the women in the room, we've created almost like a human birth canal to birth a new idea, a new vision, a new part of ourselves. We can have ceremonies that ritually cleanse us of certain things we're ashamed of, or that feeling of shame, etc., etc. Please don't underestimate how powerful this concept is. So, as we've seen, making the intangible tangible has been woven into different cultural and religious rituals for a very long time because they do something. They speak to the psyche. There is something about the language of symbol and metaphor and taking action with symbol and metaphor that really activates so much. And so that leads me to my next piece around ritual is, and I learned this from Susan Mary Hellerer, who I've mentioned before. She always used to say, ritual is sacred play. And the first time she said that, I didn't totally understand what she meant. I didn't really get it, but I came to understand pretty quickly. When we take these ritual actions to make the intangible tangible, we are playing ourselves into our next evolution of being. It's very similar to the ways that children play, right? Children play house, as an example. It's almost ritual. It's making the intangible tangible, this kind of play, this learning about relationship, learning about responsibility, etc. Right? Another thing that I love about ritual and that we want to remember when we create or co-create rituals or ceremony is that it's an opportunity for us to create sacred space. Don't underestimate the importance for yourself, for your clients, to have container, have space that feels sacred, that feels different from the mundane. When we have sacred space, we feel more connected to ourselves. We feel more connected to others. We feel more connected to spirit. However, we're going to define spirit. It doesn't have to be about God or in a religious sense at all. It could be higher power, inner wisdom, nature, etc. And even for myself, I've been creating sacred space consciously for over 25 years, since my mid-20s. Even for me, it is sometimes easy to give this short shrift. It's sometimes easy to just get busy with life and skip over making sacred space, not make the time for it. And yet it's so vital for our psyches and for our bodies and for our ability to make meaning. And going back to all of the research that I shared earlier. Another way that I understand ritual is that it's an opportunity to mark an important moment and work through transition. And this can be solo, so marking an important moment or working through a transition solo, or it can be inside of community. So, okay, what do I mean by this? Transitions are a crossing of some sort of threshold or a change in status, whether that change of status is outer or inner. Transition is about moving from one way of being to another way of being, crossing a chasm of some sort. And I just believe it's so important to prepare for these transitions, um, and or to mark these transitions, or else they end up going unnoticed, and then we don't get to honor them or celebrate them or learn the lessons from them or really own those transitions. And rituals can help us with all of that. And we obviously see some of this in popular culture, transitions, rituals around transition, whether it's a funeral, wedding, graduation, right? All of those are transitions. But actually, so many coaches and transformational practitioners lead their clients and their groups through transition, changing jobs or careers or getting promotions. That's transition. Finding love or leaving a romantic relationship or a familial relationship or a business partnership. That's transition. Starting a business, ending a business, pivoting a business, moving from a business looking one way to another, changing rates, etc. Those are transitions. Getting healthier, balancing hormone, going from unbalanced hormones to balanced hormones, moving into motherhood or perimenopause, right? Those are all transitions in health and times of life. Transitions from chaos around money to organization around money. We can see moving out of a lifelong habit of overworking into knowing how to create more space in your life as a transition. We can see shifting out of a belief like I'm not good enough to a belief of I am good enough as a transition. We can see starting new habits like a yoga practice as a transition, etc., etc., etc. So if you're a coach of any sort, chances are you're doing the work of transitions. And if you're doing the work of transitions, ritual is a rich way and a powerful way to mark those transitions and to prepare for those transitions. So I guess just one other foundational thing right now to share around ritual that I think will be helpful for you is that while we do have the birthday candles and the graduations and all of that and culture, and all of that is really wonderful, I also really feel that we don't have enough ritual in our lives and embedded into our culture. And culture has become a bit devoid of sacred space, a bit devoid of ritual. And that gap, it contributes, I believe, to a communal lack of connection, to lack of meaning, to lack of feeling connected to self, to spirit, to community. And ritual is, I think, an opportunity to support us personally, communally, to do less sleepwalking through our lives and to have more presence in our lives. It's a way to activate love and compassion and so much more. I really see it as a gift. I often say, before there was therapy, there was religion. And before there was religion, organized religion, there was ritual. All right. So we've already looked at a lot today, even though we're actually just skimming the surface when it comes to ritual. We haven't really gotten into specific ritual strategies, how to hold ritual, how to create ritual, how to hold space for it. But I do hope what I have shared has provided inspiration, ideas, it's creating some brainstorming. And I want to give you some questions that you can ask yourself to help you get started when it comes to working with ritual, or to go deeper. So, first of all, to know, like, in order to know, is my client in a place where ritual would be valuable, you might want to ask one of the following questions. What is a transition, inner or outer, that my client is currently going through that would be valuable and meaningful to Mark? Or what is something that my client is initiating on the inner or outer levels that would be valuable to Mark or to process more deeply or to embody or to integrate? Or what is something that my client is releasing either on the outer or the inner level? Or what is something that my client is ready to honor or own either on the outer level or the inner level that would be valuable to Mark or to process more deeply or to embody more or to integrate more? And you can think about this also with groups that you lead, right? What is it, something that the entire group is initiating, like a commitment to be more visible, as an example? That might be an opportunity to create a ritual around. And then from there, next question to kind of get you a little bit deeper into it, what are some things, some objects, some symbols that might symbolically represent these events or these transitions? And then start to create the ritual actions based on that. I want to put a little bit of a plug in for Into the Depths. As I said earlier, it is 4 days in person here in Charlotte. It is some of the deepest personal work that you will ever do. If you are feeling called to do archetypal energy work and religious work and ceremonial work, if you are called to go deeper into your processing of the archetypal energies of the maiden, the mother, the queen, the crone, if you are feeling called to do experiential work with your groups in person and online, if you are feeling called to learn how to facilitate your groups with more skill and mastery and gravitas, to know how to really create and hold containers where alchemy can happen, and deep, deep learning and transformation can happen. And if you want to do some inner work around your value, your worth, your willingness to be seen, your ability to stick to your goals, then please consider joining us for Into the Depths. There's just a few spots left. It is, I'm not being dramatic when I say this, it is life-changing work, not just for your business and your client work, but for you. I don't offer it very often, and it's it's really amazing. One of the bonuses for Into the Depths is Curriculum Lab. So we meet in person for 4 days in December. And then in January, February, we meet online for you to step by step develop your thought leadership, your curriculum, and your program. And I'm there not only to train you how to develop your own work and teach you all of it, but I'm also there to give you feedback on your course, on your workshop, on your program, on your retreat, whatever you're working on as you move through it. So I'll drop the link into the show notes. And just thank you for, as always, for your presence and for listening. I hope that you enjoyed the episode today. If you have any friends or colleagues that would love this and value this, please share this episode with them. And I'll see you next time.